Hi, I'm Mike Gilliam, and this is a slice of New York. Central Park is an iconic part of life in the city. 843 acres of lush green parkland in the heart of Manhattan. But did you know that before there was ever a Central Park, a chunk of the land it now occupies was home to a thriving African-American community called Seneca Village that was seized by the city and razed to make way for what we all now know as Central Park.
Seneca Village was one of the most important African-American communities in New York City in the 19th century.
On its 200th anniversary, Herbert Seignoret is helping people learn about and remember New York City's first settlement of African-American property owners.
Its significance in that it was a community of middle-class African-Americans who were established in this area for about 30 years.
Seneca Village was located between what is now West 82nd and 89th Streets in Central Park West. It all began back in 1825. Blacks were looking to get away from the discrimination and dense and unhealthy conditions downtown. Meanwhile, the Whitehead family subdivided their land into 200 lots and began selling them to blacks. A 25-year-old African-American man who worked as a shoe shiner, Andrew Williams, purchased the first 3 lots for $125. Other lots were bought by a store clerk, and a black church purchased lots to be used as a burial ground.
That foray was not by chance. We believe that it was a systematic way that they came together to purchase property to establish a community for African Americans.
Owning property was very important. By law, blacks had to own $250 worth of property and live in the state for 3 years to vote. There were no such restrictions on white men. Initially, there were about 10 homes. Eventually, 2/3 of the residents were black, while others were Irish and German.
Primarily, the core of the settlement was African Americans, and on the periphery, you had Irish Americans living in different areas on the periphery of that community.
It was the 1800s, and it's not clear how well everyone got along, but there are clues contained in church records.
There were 3 churches. 2 of the churches were African American congregations. That's the African Union and the AME Zion Church were African American churches. The All Angels Church was a mixed congregation, and by looking at the church records, baptisms, marriages, you can see some level of integration in terms of the All Angels Church.
But while the community was thriving, there was trouble brewing on the horizon. New York was growing fast, and some wanted a European-style park for residents to enjoy. First, they pushed to put a park on the east side, but that plan had to be scrapped when the city couldn't get the land through eminent domain.
It's owned by a wealthy white family. So the family goes to court and win. So the city is not able to develop that park in that area.
So, according to historians, the city set its sight on Seneca Village, where there were about 50 homes. Prior to taking the land, its value was driven down with negative press.
It was denigrated through newspaper articles where there was a smear campaign that described the inhabitants in very negative terms. So when the city took over through eminent domain, the value that they received for the property was lower than what was actually the value of the property.
Landowners did receive some compensation, but the community would be seized, knocked down, and Central Park was born. But all is not lost. Through the Central Park Conservancy, the community has been memorialized. There's a walking tour of the area, complete with narration you can hear on a smartphone.
Imagine the 5 acres around you, stretching roughly from West 82nd to West 89th Streets, not as parkland, but as a community. It was called Seneca Village, and it was primarily an African-American community.
The tour is well planned, and it includes 16 of these signs that explore the community, the history, and landscape of Seneca Village, guiding visitors through this experience. Bridget Franklin lives in Connecticut, but came specifically to see where Seneca Village once stood. She was not disappointed.
So having signs like this and where people can walk by and read about their history, it's so important. Otherwise it gets buried and we lose track of it, right? And why lose history? History, I don't care where it comes from, is so important to people, right? Especially Black people, when we are right now going through so much turmoil in America. So I think it's very important that we educate people, not only the ones, who are part of the history, but other people, so they can know what happened here.
Just a fascinating story. We're going to dig a little bit deeper into Seneca Village in just a moment. We'll talk to some experts on the history, and a little bit later, we'll also speak with the descendants of the original property owners of Seneca Village. This is a slice of New York. I'm Mike Gilliam, and this is a slice of New York. Seneca Village was the first community of African-American property owners in New York City. It was seized by eminent domain and destroyed to make way for Central Park. Here for a deep dive, we have an educator, public historian, and president of the Institute for the Exploration of Seneca Village, Cynthia Copeland, and associate director of that organization, Herbert Seignoret. He is also the Director of Academic Advising at the Colin Powell School at the City College of New York, and the Director of Community Engagement Projects with the Central Park Conservancy, John Reddick. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you for having us.
Cynthia, I was shocked when I first heard of this story. Tell me about when you first learned of Seneca Village.
I wasn't surprised because as someone who studies public history and having been working on the African burial ground, it just felt like the ancestors were having a moment in the late 80s, early 1990s, and they just wanted their stories told. And so it just felt like the voices and the muted witnesses were starting to sort of surface and sort of make their way up into the public and demanding that, you know what, we need people to tell this story. And so luckily for me, I was, tapped to be part of the community that would do the research and learn about it. But finding out about the richness of the community, that was definitely surprising to find out just how much property meant to individuals, what people were collecting in their homes, thinking about the connections that these folks in Seneca Village were making, not just to their community of Seneca Village, but there were other Black communities in the different boroughs. These folks were sort of working with each other to promote voting rights, to make sure that they had property so that they could vote, to establish the churches, to establish mutual aid societies. So it was really an incredible blending and melding of individuals who were looking for their rights to exist, especially coming out of the period when New York State had been enslaved and manumission had come about in 1827. Seneca Village gets its start on the 27th of September in 1825. 1824, 1825 is when the properties start to be sold en masse, and Black folks were purchasing this property so that the Black males could vote.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Herbert? What did you think the first time you heard of this?
So it was a period when I just learned of the rediscovery of African burial ground and the power of material culture to tell a story and to give a voice to silenced communities felt very important to me. Originally started studying architecture, but then with the rediscovery of the African burial ground, I saw the ability of material culture to give a voice to communities that were silenced.
This is very timely. This is the 200th anniversary, right?
It is the 200th anniversary. And to Cynthia and their earlier points, I'm a resident of Harlem. My background is in architectural history, fascinated about Harlem history. And the New York Historical had this exhibition about Seneca Village, which I had never heard. And my first exposure as a sort of resident and citizen of New York was that exhibition. And I was just reminding her they had the listing from the census of all the different family names, but no people connections. And they just had little cubbies where if you knew this family, they asked people soliciting for information. So it was the first kind of breakthrough looking at the elements, the historic elements from the different churches and things that they had, looking at the census records, that for me as an African American, I could start with not thinking of it just as a place, but the population and the human stories that really make it more galvanizing.
Cynthia, describe for me what life was like in Seneca Village. Was it a tough life?
Well, it's hard to say because we weren't there, but
Right,
based
right.
upon the material culture that has come from beneath the surface and the newspaper accounts, it seemed that it was a thriving community. People owned their property. Individuals would build their homes. There were families there. There seemed to be kinship relationships that were established within the community. There were 3 cemeteries. There was a school. The people who lived there worked in a variety of occupations, including mariners, and we had laborers, and we had domestic workers. We had a teacher in the community. We had a midwife. So there was this opportunity to just sort of have a self-determined community. It seems that they were working to be able to uplift who they were as people of African heritage.
How did they run it? Was there a structure like that? Was there the equivalent of a mayor or something like that? Was there someone who ran the community? Or was it just kind of everyone came together?
It's just people coming together, kind of like the big stoop, right? Before there were stoops, there was Seneca Village, and people would have their little pathways, their little gardens. They'd be closely connected to one another. When you look at the maps, the historical maps that are there, you can see how the city had been gridded, and there were noticings of and recordings of the size of the property, which is basically what we see today, 10 by 25. And you had a variety of structures. There were some homes that were 1- and 2-story framed houses. They had a greengrocer. They had churches. They had shanties, indeed, were there.
But not all shanties.
Not all shanties. No. They were primarily what would have been considered substantive houses that were on the site. But of course, you had a mixed residential area, if you will.
And to speak to the grid was engineered, sort of staked out, but the streets weren't all cut. And so you could start buying a lot to the lot size, as you were saying. So it's so distant from downtown, so definitely a lot of that proportion would be cheaper at that location than buying an equal piece of property downtown. So the community had like access to land in a sort of affordable level of possibility to acquire land, and they were distant from what had been a hostile environment. So they could grow in a certain way and not be visible to the broader city. I think that helped them as well.
And if you look at the historic maps, for example, the condemnation map, you can see the layout of the houses within New York City's grid, which, as John mentioned, was not laid out yet, but was surveyed. So actually, if you go to the park right now, there are survey markers that date into that period where it was envisioned that avenues and streets would be laid out. So the property owners built their homes within the lot and block that would eventually be built.
And also over time, John referenced the census records of we got the names for the exhibition that I co-curated with my colleague Grady Turner. We actually used several maps across time periods from the 1830s and the 1840s and the 1850s, but it wasn't until we found the condemnation map, the Central Park condemnation map, that really outlined the names of the individuals who owned the property. So you could really see the names written, you could see the measurements of the land that was there, because clearly it was being surveyed because the city was going to take the property by eminent domain, and ultimately the individuals who lived in Seneca Village were to receive some form of compensation, although many of the people, most of them, were not happy because they didn't think they were getting market value. And not only that, this was their home. They wanted to stay there. It was a community. They weren't really about having this land and then having the land taken away from them.
And someone like Andrew Williams, I mean, he was one of the first, he was in the group of first purchasers. He lived there the longest, so he could walk to church, you know, he could take his kids to school, he's walking distance to the Hudson River, he wanted to fish or any of those sorts of things. So no matter what they gave him in that time period, where's an African American going to find an equivalent community? Right. And so it's not just about the money, it's about how would you find equalness somewhere else. And so nothing the city could give them at the time could help match what they had in that community.
Excellent. Okay, we're going to take a short break right now. And when we come back, we're going to have descendants of the man who bought the first lots in Seneca Village. This is A Slice of New York. Welcome back. I'm Mike Gilliam, and this is A Slice of New York. We're learning about Seneca Village, the first community of African American property owners in New York City that once sat inside what is now Central Park. Joining us now by Zoom, we have Andrew Williams, fifth-generation grandson to the first property owner, Andrew Williams, and his wife, Mareia Williams. Together, they wrote The Williams Legacy, a journey from Seneca Village to Central Park. And I should mention that Andrew is a part of our CUNY family, having gone to the City College of New York for electrical engineering. Welcome to both of you. Mareia, talk to me a little bit about researching the book. What was that like?
Oh my, overwhelming, confusing a lot of times because there's so much information. So it was, it was a challenge figuring out who went where, what went where, and when. But it's been an amazing journey. For me, it began 1996 from my father-in-law, Andrew Thomas III. And he started telling me the history. First of all, he was saying, no more Andrews.
A lot of Andrews, huh?
A lot of Andrews. So I am the second marriage. So when I had our first son together, it was like, so where do we go from here? And so that's when I started learning about the family, the history, and the many different branches of the family.
Mm-hmm. Andrew, tell us about the book. What are we going to find in there?
It's written in the book. If you dig deep, you'll see that it wasn't just about Black individuals. It was also Irish immigrants. It was people from all over the world that made this community. So we embrace that in our lives today. Community is just that, community. It doesn't matter where you're from.
In writing the book, did it tend to bring the family even closer together by sharing this history of your ancestors?
Oh, absolutely. And we also located more family in the process. So children of Andrew Thomas Jr. So we found 6 more children.
Wow. When you tell these stories to the young Williamses, what is their reaction? Do their faces light up when you tell them these things?
Absolutely.
Sense of pride.
Yeah.
Because even when I grew up, I was born in New York, 1970. I grew up, it wasn't until probably I was in my 40s where I really started hearing the depth of the story. I kind of heard bits and pieces, but even I was unaware of that. I know my sister was not aware of that, and nor were the majority of my siblings that actually probably lived with my dad. But it came out later on, and through some historians bringing it to light just by a connection on Facebook, all of a sudden we started realizing exactly what Seneca Village is. And I spent, like I said, in New York, the majority of my life in New York. I visited Central Park. I hung out in that area, and I didn't know that was actually the place where my ancestors were.
What was the most surprising thing you learned about Andrew Williams?
The most surprising thing about Andrew Williams is, I don't know, I kind of learned more about myself. to be honest with you. I kind of related. I related to Andrew Williams so much so because I see myself in Andrew Williams. You know, the willingness not to give up no matter what the challenge is. You know, whether you're poor or you don't have, it doesn't matter. You have to commit to being a success at whatever you do. So you make something out of nothing. You build out of what wasn't there. So he went from nothing to land buying 3 plots, right? Which he built up a home and moved his family, and he created a community. He was the first one to buy that property. So that's something from nothing. So I look at myself and my accomplishments in life, and I found myself following the same trail, the same track to success, that I've made something out of nothing. I grew up in poverty, and here I am. I'm not the richest person, but I'm doing very well. I've taken care of my family. I have property. You know, I'm trying to pass this on as so did Andrew Williams did. So I find myself following.
I'm curious to know how you folks feel about the way all of this was handled when they actually seized the property by eminent domain and eventually built the park there. Is there any bitterness there, or are you guys okay with this?
Well, you can't be okay with it, right? You'll never be okay with it. But I wouldn't use the term bitter. I would say, you know, it is disturbing, but we can learn from this. All right. This is what life is about. It's not about being fear, but what do you do? Right? How do you make it better? What do you take from this? All right. I often look at some of these situations as inspiring for me to do better, to try harder, to overcome.
Have you walked the tour?
Yes.
Yes, we did.
Yeah. Loved it. Loved it. We walked the tour. This was, what was this, about 3, 4 years? So it's been so long now. So it's longer than 4 years. But just before COVID, we walked the tour. They were doing a tour, and that's when one of the tour guides made an announcement that, oh yeah, unfortunately, there's no relatives that you know, that we can connect to, and then we were like, well, we're right here.
Wow. John, that must be music to your ears.
Well, it's music to my ears, and Andrew Williams to me is like a touchstone. Even though we don't know other people's stories, the fact he was part of Mother Amy Zion Church, there were so many prominent people in that church, and you just realize he saved his little pennies and put money aside, and whatever the smart people were doing, if he could do it, he was matching what they were doing. So as a citizen of the city and taking advantage of opportunity, he to me is like that New Yorker spirit about like each little step can take you somewhere higher, and he exemplifies that for me.
Mareia and Andrew, now that the book is written, what would you like to see happen next? Would you like to see this become like a documentary, a mini-series, a movie? What would you like to see happen next with this information?
Really simple. Tell the story. Doesn't matter how. Tell the story, because it's not a tragedy.
Right. It's actually very uplifting.
Exactly. It's about resilience, tenacity, and the importance of community. So for us, it's really about just telling the story. Tell the whole story, because there are many who can't trace their history. The Williams family is well documented in the newspapers, from the original Andrew to Andrew Thomas Sr. Very well documented, giving to the community. So all we really desire is educating others, because it's not just the Williams family history, it is everyone's history. So it's the community's history.
Tell the story.
Just tell the story. That's it. It doesn't matter how, when, or where. Just tell the story.
Cynthia, what would you like to see happen with that book?
I happen to agree with Mareia and Drew. I think that this is an amazing story. It's a model community. I think wherever you go in the United States and abroad, there's a Seneca Village story to be told. And so there are ways of connecting people. We have a footprint, if you will, a blueprint on how to do it, and that means engaging all kinds of people to tell the story, because it isn't just the three of us and the two of them on the screen who are telling this story. It involved many, many community members, partners of museums, universities, colleges, etc., and we just couldn't do it without them. And I do also want to say, to that end, Cal Jones, who was on our advisory board and was the former Manhattan Borough community historian, he really helped to spearhead the research to try to connect the Williams family to the story. We got a hint, you know, as was mentioned, when we had the exhibition, we really wanted people who had surnames to sort of look in their attics and see if they could make connections. And it took a while. Every time the archaeologies, Herbert and Diana Wall and Nan Rothschild, when we were out there, we were trying to tell people, look, we're looking for descendants. If you know someone, if you think you might be. And so we always put a cry out whenever we had an opportunity to promote the work that we were doing. And finally, one of the Williams members said, I think that we're part of this, but I'm not sure. And of course, because we're a volunteer organization, it took a little while for people to do it. Cal had a lot of time on his hands, so he took it on and really made the connections and got us all together so that we could indeed tell the story. So it takes a lot of fortitude, it takes a lot of connection, but when you have people who are available to help to tell the stories, invite them in to the process.
Andrew, Mareia, one last question. What do you want people who read this book to take away from it?
I want them to take away the fact that there's history that they may not be aware of, and that they need to start looking into it and need to be more aware of it, because America's bigger than what you think it is.
Okay, that's going to have to be the last word. Just a fascinating conversation and story. I want to thank all of our guests, Andrew Williams and his wife Mareia Williams. Together they wrote The Williams Legacy, a journey from Seneca Village to Central Park. The president of the Institute for the Exploration of Seneca Village, Cynthia Copeland, and associate director of that organization, Herbert Seignoret, and the director of the community engagement projects with the Central Park Conservancy, John Reddick. Thank you all, and thank you for joining us. I'm Mike Gilliam. We'll see you next time on A Slice of New York.